We're ready to go.
Good morning. This is Dr. Ron Daniels, President of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, welcoming you to this forum on the international crisis in Cuba. It is occurring on February 21st, which is the day of the martyrdom of El Haj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X. That is an intentional um, dedication since the Pan-African Unity Dialogue usually meets quarterly, and we have an annual Malcolm X commemorative session. But this year, rather than having an actual meeting, because of the urgency and the danger posed to Cuba and to the Black world and to the whole world by the current administration in Washington, D.C., we thought it would be much better to have a forum, an informational educational forum on the crisis in Cuba and to do some basic educating and to find out what it is that we can do in order to intervene effectively in this moment of grave crisis. We would be remiss in our responsibility if we did not, on this occasion, also acknowledge and have a collective ashe for the passing of one of the great leaders of our time. In fact, in the history of these United States of America, the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, who was a devout and staunch proponent of not only Pan-Africanism and internationalism. He was strong in his support for a number of nations, including Cuba. And we could go on and on about his record, but nonetheless, in fact, saw a clip a couple of days ago with Reverend Jackson meeting with Fidel Castro, and in fact, having, obviously some serious conversations, though, about the nature of what is happening in the world. This forum today is, again, an educational one. Our presentations are going to be relatively short. We hope that you will stay with us through the entirety of the forum because we're working to have a block of time on the back end where you'll have an opportunity through the chat to ask questions, to make comments, and whatever you'd like to do in that regard. And of course, we will be looking to do actions. We'll be looking the Pan-African Unity Dialogue of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century. We'll be looking forward to actually engaging in a number of actions as we move forward as well. Now, as we move our program forward, I am hoping that we have a young sister, Kim Poole, who is with the Teaching Artists Institute, who is supposed to do a tribute to Malcolm X, but I'm not sure she is in the house yet. And if she is not, what we're going to do is we're going to move to a powerful moment of solidarity between Cuba and Black America. It was a time, September 19th, I think, 1960, when Fidel Castro came to the United States for the UN General Assembly. And he decided that rather than stay downtown, he would go uptown to the capital of Black America. And in so doing, he had a famous meeting with Malcolm X. So without further ado, we have an interview, a recorded interview with Herb Boyd, who could not be with us today. Herb Boyd is a renowned author and the senior staff writer for the New York Amsterdam News, and much more than that. Actually, he is being honored this evening at the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz Center, receiving their Vanguard Award. So rather than have him participate, he's getting his family ready and all that for this great honor. But we took a moment to just have an interview with him. So we would like to share that interview with you now. As we convene this very important forum on February 21st, the day of the martyrdom of El Haj Malik El Shabazz, our shining Black Prince, it's important to remember that Malcolm X was not only a nationalist and a Pan-Africanist, he was an internationalist. In that regard, one of the most amazing moments in the history of Black America was when Fidel Castro decided to visit Harlem on the occasion of the convening of the United Nations General Assembly in September of 1960. And there's no better person to talk about what that meant what it meant to Harlem, his own reflections on it, none other than Herb Boyd, who is our, a master author, writer, and the senior writer for the New York Amsterdam News. Herb Boyd, tell us what it was like to have Malcolm and Fidel meet in Harlem.
Well, thanks, Dr. D. You know, we've been together on so many different occasions, and this is a special one for me. Anytime got Malcolm as a subject, my heart started beating fast. I loved him just without reservation, without hesitation. Over the years, I met him for the first time. Well, this 1960 is interesting because I guess I met him just about the same time in Detroit. Although by this time, I'm living in New York. In fact, I was working at the Atlas Brake Company out in Canarsie when this event happened. I heard about it, Ron, after it had happened.
Hmm.
Fortunately, hundreds, hundreds of Harlemites were on top of it, and they turned out in mass outside the Teresa Hotel. That particular moment is captured very well by, first of all, I'd like to give a shout out to Rosemary Mealy, who captured the essence of that meeting between Fidel and Malcolm in September the 1960 in her book. And in fact, she rounded up a number of participants, conversionals, people who, journalists, photographers who were on top of that. What happened is that Fidel did not want the major press at this event, and it was a very very firm position that he took with his security, as well as the New York Police Department. The only reason Malcolm was there is that he was a member of a committee that was put together by the 28th Precinct. Imagine that. The police pulled it together, and Malcolm was the only member of the committee that was available. So that was one reason that Malcolm was able to get past this whole contingent, just accordion, people. I mean, the regular press, could not get in, and they were upset to see that Malcolm also invited in some members of the black press. And among those, one who was very close to me over the years was Jimmy Booker at the Amsterdam News. In fact, Jimmy had just left maybe a few months before I arrived at the Amsterdam News, so we never really worked together. But since he was still one of the most noted reporters roaming that community, I gravitated to him. He would call me up. We would talk about different things. And one of the things that Ron, I pressed him on was like, tell me a little bit more about, because you were allowed to get in there along with you at Ralph Matthews, who with the New York Citizen Call. I don't know where Ralph is these days. And the photographer, photojournalist Carl Nesfield was also there. So they were the three, along with two members of the Nation of Islam, including Captain Joseph. One of the things about this is that Malcolm is still a member of the Nation of Islam at this time. And one of the consequential questions that arises is that how did Elijah Muhammad feel about this? That Malcolm was beginning to extend his reach, beyond the Nation of Islam and not get involved in political situations, which always upset Elijah Muhammad. So there's a kind of a backdrop. That's kind of thing that hangs over this situation, how Malcolm had to navigate this thing. It was not the first time he began to, in essentially violate some of the rules and regulations of the Nation of Islam, even relating to the incident that happened with Johnson X. Hinton. And that's when that momentous moment when he pulled together all of the members of the Nation of Islam and they formed the phalanx around the brutal beating of Mr. Hinton. So anyway, the thing is that he had to be very careful and navigate in that situation and meeting with this here renowned leader, revolutionary leader. Of course, now this is the first step I mean, Malcolm had already gone to Africa in 1959, and reaching out to Fidel at this point just extended and began essentially his whole meeting with world-renowned leaders, as he would do in 1964. And that particular pilgrimage, that tour that he made of the Middle East and Africa, that was a momentous thing that Ilyas and I captured in the whole diary of Malcolm X. But anyway, those are the kind of concerns that Malcolm certainly had on his mind. But the question is what did they talk about? You know, one of the things beyond Rosemary's book is that obviously the FBI was on the case. Malcolm always realized and recognized that he was under surveillance, as I did in my book, in terms of the CIA and Malcolm X and other blacks, to offer some evidence of that. But the FBI was there, but the only one page out of this here surveillance thing comes out of that. So you don't get a feel for exactly what that conversation was all about. It was an impromptu for the most part.
So, Herb, it must have been powerful, utterly electrifying for the people of Harlem, who couldn't be in the meeting, but the fact that Malcolm, was meeting with Fidel and that he was not downtown, he was uptown in Harlem must have been huge. It must have had a great impact on the psyche of all those who came.
I mean, one of the things about this is that the Nation of Islam was just really beginning to surface. You know, that's the hate that hate produced. You know, the Mike Wallace thing, along with Louis Lomax, that would come almost within the same circle of activities and events around this moment. But the revolution, I mean, you have to understand how the revolution had occurred in Cuba and how that began to resonate. Certainly, the Bay of Pigs situation gave additional resonance. So here is Malcolm sitting with Fidel Castro. My goodness. I mean, the Harlem community, I mean, it was like an echo chamber outside yelling, Viva Fidel, Viva Fidel.
Yes, they were shouting, Viva Fidel, Viva Fidel, Viva Fidel. Well, what a powerful moment that was. And there are a lot of images about it. And we appreciate her referencing Rosemary Mealy and Sam Anderson. They were certainly and continue to be great advocates and devotees of Cuba and did incredible work. And shout out to Herb once again as he receives this Vanguard Award at the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz Center this evening. Well, we now want to get into the meat of our program. I just want to outline how we intend to flow. We've intentionally put together a series of what we call vignettes, or sort of short pieces, short educational pieces. Each of the persons that we're calling upon as either presenters or respondents could spend, a long time and being sharing from very expert positions and whatnot. But we wanted to shorten it a bit. This is a preliminary sort of first time around. We're aware of the fact that there's some people in our audience who may not know a lot about Cuba or the Cuban Revolution or its accomplishments and those things. So this is a first effort, if you will. There'll be more in which there may be more in-depth examination. But at this critical moment, we certainly wanted to get people on board with having a general familiarity with Cuba and to begin to talk about how we might move forward. So we're going to have really four short presentations. We're dealing with four basic questions. One of the questions will be, what was Cuba like before the revolution? The second question is, what were the accomplishments of the Cuban Revolution? Third question was, what was the impact on Black America and global Africa, or the Pan-African world? And then finally, coming right up to this very moment, what was the impact of this embargo slash blockade? And what can we do? What will be the call to action? To start us off, and I'm gonna the presenters in this order will be Bill Fletcher, and Bill Fletcher is widely known to folks who have followed his work over the years. The president emeritus of Trans-Africa Forum. He's also a veteran social and political activist, and one of the leading voices working on labor issues in the United States and beyond. Um, Following him will be Olga Sambria, who was a collaborator with the Puerto Rican Institute for International Relations, which is based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And then Cuba's contribution to the global African world will be David Abdullah. He is the political leader for the Movement for Social Justice and a member of the Regional Executive Committee for the Assembly of Caribbean People, coming to us from Trinidad, Port-au-Prince, Trinidad and Tobago. Those will be our first three presenters, and then we'll hear from James Early, who is a former Smithsonian Institute Assistant Secretary for Education and Public Service, and a consultant on democracy and statecraft heritage, and much, much more. So we're going to begin, and I've warned them, they've each got 10 minutes, and I've got a little clock here, and when you hear that little bell, that means it's time to sort of move on. So I know it's hard with these great thinkers to do that, but Bill Fletcher, thank you so much for being with us. You have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us. And uh, let me start with this. January 1999, I was part of a delegation that went to Cuba. It was a Trans-Africa delegation led by then President Randall Robinson. And we had an opportunity at the very end of the trip to meet with then President Fidel Castro. It was an incredible meeting, but at one point we were asking him about race. And he looked at us and he said, in 1959, when we won, we thought that what we need to do was simply make racism and racist discrimination illegal. And we did that. And then he said, but we underestimated the impact of 500 years of Spanish colonialism and US neocolonialism on the consciousness of our people. And I thought that that was an incredibly profound comment, very undefensive. And it spoke to the situation Cuba's in now, but also how we understand what actually led up to the Cuban Revolution. Cuba was a major site in the slave trade. Many slaves that would be ultimately brought to the United States had been first brought to Cuba and then taken up to the United States. There were efforts at a certain juncture in the 19th century by the Spanish to increase the white population because of how overwhelming the Black population of Cuba was. The two wars of independence against Spain had at their core Black people. In the first war, there was a major effort for emancipation against slavery. And then in the second war, which began in 1895 and ultimately was co-opted by the United States, although Jose Marti is most well known as the initial leader of the revolution, it was Black Cubans that was central to that. And the fact of Black Cubans being central was something that was very important when the United States entered the war in 1898, because the United States, at that point led by William McKinley as president, was very fearful, very antagonistic to the idea of any kind of Black leadership of Cuba. And so they went about a number of things. They basically forced the newly independent Cuba to agree to something that was called the Platt Amendment, PLATT, which guaranteed the United States the right to intervene in Cuban affairs. It's just an absolutely unbelievable act, but it starts to feel like what is being perpetrated against Venezuela right now and what the United States clearly wants to do with Cuba at present. The United States also was very active in promoting racial segregation and various forms of discrimination and propping up forces within Cuba that were very much in opposition to Black freedom and to Black political power. It was ultimately the Communist Party of Cuba, which was known as the Socialist Party, PSP, of Cuba, that became a major champion of Black liberation within Cuba. But race was an underlying issue and has been in Cuba for a very long time. And the United States went to all sorts of efforts to continue to perpetrate racial segregation. And beginning in the 1930s, late 30s and 40s, you had the introduction of the Cosa Nostra, the Italian or Sicilian mafia that began moving into Cuba, and particularly in establishing links with and helping to build gambling casinos and other forms of corrupt activity within the island. It was the neo-colonial rule of Cuba by the United States in an alignment with various elites there and in alignment with mobsters that contributed to the eruption that first takes place in 1953 militarily in the attack on the Moncada barracks by forces led by Fidel Castro. And then later in 1956, the resumption of a war that results in 1959 in the victory of the July 26th movement that was led by people like Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and others. A final note, just on a strange cultural level, anyone who watched Godfather 2, the film from the 1970s, might remember a scene in which Michael Corleone, played by Al Pacino, is making a comment to this Jewish mobster about the developing crisis in Cuba. It was the revolution. And he makes a point about how a Cuban revolutionary set off a hand grenade in a car, killing himself, but also killing representatives of the government, police and military. And he makes this comment about the level of dedication of these forces compared with what he was seeing elsewhere. And I thought that was a really interesting moment because he was really summarizing that there was this incredible social force within Cuba that had decided at great risk to move forward and to take down a repressive, racist, and neo-colonial regime at that point led by a man named Batista. And with that, I will end my comments. Thank you very much.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for that very, very illuminating presentation, quite powerful, outlining that history and staying within your time. I mean, goodness gracious, I mean, this is impressive. We're now really honored at the recommendation of Comrade Don Rojas, who brought our attention to the next presenter, whom he knows well. And I think he mentioned that she's also had been associated with the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. I remember over the years having an association dealing and fighting for Puerto Rican independence as well with some comrades that we might know in common. And indeed, when I was at the Center for Constitutional Rights, one of our leading lawyers and one of our board chairpersons, Ashley, was from Puerto Rico as well. So we're honored to have her join us, Olga Sanabria, in order to talk about the accomplishments, which were extraordinary and are extraordinary. But again, at least we forget the accomplishments of the Cuban Revolution. You have the floor. I,
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be in this panel, and I'd like to thank the organizers and all your hard work for getting this done. And I'd like to thank John Rojas, a longtime friend for more than 40 years, actually, with whom I sort of like reconnected recently, and also say hello to David, that someone that I know and admire for a very long time. And I also like to say that it's such a timely event because of what we're seeing in right now, the intensification of the blockade, especially the oil blockade that's taking place right now against Cuba, and other international developments, including the kidnapping of President Maduro and his wife, an assembly member, Celia Flores. So thank you very much. I would like to begin by talking about the material advances in Cuba in terms of human rights. And I think that these advances are somewhat known, especially in the area of healthcare and education. But of course, the social development and advances of the Cuban Revolution go beyond that to extend to the right to housing, the right of organization, exactly, the right, of course, as had been mentioned, of Black Cubans. So these advances are somewhat known. And I would like to emphasize also on the social advances in Cuba in terms of not just advances in education and health and other areas, but also advances that have to do with consciousness, that have to do how one sees oneself in one's greater context. And I think that that has been a huge advance of the Cuban Revolution as regards the Cuban people, but also beyond. So I think one of the things that the Cuban Revolution has advanced from the beginning has been the actual consciousness of the Cuban people of the importance of their national sovereignty and independence. And of course, after the revolution, we saw the redefinition of the defense of sovereignty and the importance of sovereignty and independence. And of course, to the outside world, the contributions and advances that the revolution made possible in terms of the understanding of revolutionary forces and people all over the world regarding the meaning of solidarity, the meaning of anti-imperialism, the meaning of the love of other struggles, of the love of the peoples and struggle of other countries. And I think that this is something that has been a great advance of the Cuban Revolution beyond its own borders, and how the Cuban Revolution has contributed internationally to revolutionaries everywhere. And as I said, what would we know about anti-imperialism? What would we know about solidarity and the love of other peoples and their struggles if we did not have the point of reference that the Cuban Revolution from the beginning created for us? So I think that's an advancement and contribution that we really need to also be very conscious of and also be very grateful for. I like to go back to the advances in Cuba internally and what I mentioned about the people and advances in terms of their consciousness of themselves and their role in making a reality the advances and the objectives of the Cuban Revolution. And these advances extend to mass organization of the Cuban people. The revolution created the conditions for the Cuban people to be active in their defense through mass organizations that had to do with the community, such as the Committees in Defense of the Revolution, mass organization in the trade union sector, mass organization of students, mass organization of women for their rights and everything that the Cuban Revolution wanted to advance and didn't advance in terms of the rights of women. And of course, what has also been mentioned, the rights and the advancement of Black Cubans. Another source of organization that was an advance for the Cuban people after the revolution was the organization of cadres and the bringing together of cadres in organizations, such as the Cuban Communist Party, such as the Union of Communist Youth. Those are just two examples of organizations, political organizations, that organize the cadre in order that cadre be inserted into all the objectives and processes and advances of the Cuban Revolution. And of course, as I also mentioned, and I'm only mentioning a few, the advances of the Cuban Revolution regarding local organization, and especially, as I mentioned before, the Committees in Defense of the Revolution. And we cannot emphasize enough this advance of the Cuban people in terms of their organization, because as organizers that we here all are, we know the difficulty of organizing and also the great importance of people being organized, because it's through organization that people can channel that consciousness of transformation. So I think that when we talk about the advances of the Cuban Revolution, we tend to talk a lot, and the information is out there, and volumes have been written about the social advances, medicine, education, housing, and other areas. But I wanted to emphasize these advances, which have to do with the human being's consciousness and contributions within a revolutionary process. Like I said before, the contributions outside regarding our consciousness of anti-imperialism, of solidarity, especially, what would we know about these were it not for the Cuban Revolution as a point of reference for all of us? Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about Puerto Rico and the relationship between the Puerto Rican people and the Cuban people up until the very present, but I'll be brief. This relationship goes back to the middle of the 19th century, when Cuban revolutionaries and Puerto Rican revolutionaries coincided in New York and created the Puerto Rican Revolutionary Party. And within that party, the Committee for Puerto Rico Independence. Now, this relationship extended throughout. However, it was difficult to materialize even after Cuban independence because of what our friend Dr. Fletcher mentioned regarding the Platt Amendment, which, even though Cuba had become independent, it had this lockhold of the Platt Amendment, which prevented Cuba and the Cuban government from actually developing progressive policies, and that includes international solidarity and materializing institutionally solidarity with Puerto Rico. So it isn't until the Cuban Revolution that this profound relationship between Puerto Rico and Cuba can be materialized in a stronger relationship of solidarity. And Cuba has been extremely expressed its solidarity with Puerto Rico, especially in the international arena, where Cuba has facilitated, supported, encouraged the participation of the Puerto Rican independence movement in, for example, the movement of non-aligned countries, within the United Nations and also within non-governmental coalitions, so to speak. So this solidarity has been materialized, as I said before, after the Cuban Revolution, even though before, on a non-governmental basis, there was still that relationship of solidarity between Puerto Ricans and Cubans. Cuba has provided for us the existence of a mission, a quasi-diplomatic mission in Cuba that represents and has represented a number of important Puerto Rican organizations, such as the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and then the New Independence Movement, and presently the National Hostos Movement for the Independence of Puerto Rico. And the mission provides a platform for information to the Cuban organizations, information to the diplomatic corps in Cuba, information, and this is all, of course, on Puerto Rico and our struggle for independence, information to visiting delegations, and also, of course, information to visiting delegations from Puerto Rico in Cuba. Delegations from Puerto Rico that have traveled especially to international events in Cuba. And Cuba has also been in solidarity with Puerto Rico internationally because the issue of Puerto Rico is continually present, and the issue of our struggle for independence, our colonial struggle, the oppression that the Puerto Rican people have suffered, not just in Puerto Rico, but also in the United States. This has been present continually in public statements of Cuba, both inside Cuba and, of course, within international organizations. I wanted to also, in terms of this relationship between the Puerto Rican people and Cuba, to state that the solidarity has been reciprocal to the extent that the Puerto Rican people, the Puerto Rican independence progressive forces, have pushed the issue of Puerto Rico within our country and within our people. It needs to be known that the Cuban exile community of the 1960s that settled primarily in Miami and created an atmosphere of terror in Miami regarding anyone in Miami that dared to mention Cuba, to mention socialism, mention the Cuban Revolution, to mention socialism, to mention Fidel Castro. There was a terror atmosphere created in Miami around this. And the Cuban exile community would have wanted to create the same thing in San Juan. In fact, they might have preferred to settle in mass in San Juan because Spanish-speaking country, same culture in terms of weather, for many, many reasons. But the pro-independence movement from day one, and even before the triumph of the revolution, was in solidarity with Cuba and manifested that solidarity in a very concrete way. The Cuban...
We need you to wrap up, please.
Okay, I will. So just to say that the Puerto Rican Socialist Party created the institutions to facilitate travel to Cuba by the Puerto Rican people, and also held many solidarity activities. And for this, and I really want to get this in here before I conclude, the Puerto Rican independence movement has paid a price because during the 60s, 70s, and even 80s, United States intelligence coordinated with reactionary Cuban forces in Puerto Rico to provide information and to provide the means for the Cuban community, the reactionary terrorist Cuban community in Puerto Rico, to attack the Puerto Rican independence movement. And the newspaper of the movement was attacked. A daycare center that we had was attacked. The travel agency that sold tickets for travel to Cuba was attacked. Mass activities of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and other Puerto Rican organizations were attacked, and there were lives that were lost because of this aggressiveness of the Cuban exile community in Cuba. But under no circumstances did the Puerto Rican movement lose territory in terms of our solidarity with the Cuban Revolution and in terms of our relationship with the Cuban people. So I wanted to get that in there. Thank you for extending my time. And I would also express my deep concern over the demise of Jesse Jackson, and of course also express our deep admiration for Malcolm X and for the role of the Black revolutionary movement in the United States regarding Puerto Rico, solidarity with Puerto Rico, and solidarity with the Puerto Rican independence movement. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate those revelations and that were provided. Were very instructive. I would say, however, that we often take for granted some of the social references that you mentioned are widely known. And quite frankly, there may be people who are listening who are not aware of how these accomplishments. And let me just quickly say that we live in the United States of America where there is no universal health care, whereas in Cuba there is universal health care. But also Cubans have developed some of the most advanced medical techniques in the world. I can recall during the Hurricane Katrina, when the communities were in emergency situations, dire situations and so forth, Cubans offered to send doctors and so forth to come to the U.S. And indeed, many people go to Cuba to get treated for illnesses virtually inexpensively that are very, very advanced. And similarly, the educational system, free education, also free housing, all of the things that the United States does not have as a quote unquote developed nation, Cuba has. Its ability to broaden and develop has been stunted by, as others will speak about, but it is important to say that. I will say that the other thing quickly, unfortunately, I had one visit and I was supposed to come back and whatever, but the focus on education from a practical standpoint, where students are not sort of taught from sort of an esoteric methodology, but from the point of view of practicing that which they want to become. So if it's agriculture, they're actually engaged in agriculture. They want to do communications. They're even at young children are learning how to film and to do videos. And I'm sure it's even more now. So I just want to quickly say that those aspects are incredibly important simply because of the contrast of this nation being strangled by the United States of America that does not have the kind of socioeconomic benefits that Cuba has provided as a part of the revolution. So I just wanted to add to that presentation, but we really, really appreciate you talking about the question of the formation of consciousness, which is by no means something that we should underestimate. Well, let's now turn to David Abdallah. One of the things that I recall is that Fidel openly called Cuba an Afro-Hispanic nation. There's no hesitation about that. He said, we are an Afro-Hispanic nation. And so we wanted to have a presentation that also talks explicitly about the contribution of Cuba to global Africa. David Abdallah, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Brother Ron Daniels, and greetings to everyone. I want to say that today is also symbolic for this particular discussion about Cuba and solidarity with Cuba, because February 24th is an important date in the Cuban history of independence. My friend and comrade Bill Fletcher spoke about the 1895 War of Independence. So that was started on the 24th of February. So in 3 days' time, Cuba recognizes that anniversary of the 1895 War of Independence, which was led by Jose Marti and, very importantly, by Maximo Gomez, who was a Black Cuban and was one of the major generals in the field in that war of independence. And I just received this morning a message from Cuba, from a comrade from Cuba, from the Institute of Cuban People with the Friendship with the Peoples, saying that because of the blockade of energy and other matters and the strangling of Cuba at this time, that there are certain counter-revolutionary forces within Cuba that are planning to do something around 24th of February. And so it's important for us to express solidarity with the Cuban Revolution and to call out these elements who no doubt are being supported by Rubio and by Trump and by others. So we need to pay attention, and therefore this is most timely indeed. Switching now to the issue of my topic, which is Cuba's contribution to the global African world. We must remember that Che, part of the Cuban leadership, went to the Congo in 1965 in support of the revolutionary movement for independence in the Congo, being led by Patrice Lumumba. And I can't give all the details. I'm just going to, given time, identify some of the highlights. The first tricontinental conference of people was held in Cuba in January of '66. We're talking just a few years after the Cuban Revolution. January '66, leading to the formation of the Organization of Solidarity of the Peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, OSPAL. And that great African revolutionary, Amilcar Cabral, made an important intervention in that tricontinental conference in January of '66, which is now known as a weapon of theory, very important theoretical address by Cabral. And incidentally, the President General of the Oilfields Workers Trade Union, of which I was a part for very many years, George Weeks, of course, I wasn't there in 1966, but George Weeks did attend that first tricontinental conference in Cuba. Had to travel from Trinidad to London, London to Spain, and Spain to Havana because of the economic blockade against Cuba. And then, of course, we know about the Cuban military mission in Africa in defense of the frontline state of Angola, Zimbabwe, and also, very importantly, to ensure the liberation of South Africa and Namibia from apartheid and colonialism and racism. And Cubans went to Angola, Namibia, fought against the South African army, and defeated them at the very historic Battle of Quito Carnivale in late 1987, early 1988. So that was very important. But Cuba had been in Angola in support of the MPLA in Angola from the mid-1970s. And hundreds of Cubans lost their lives in defense of the liberation from apartheid and colonialism of Africa. And, we must never, ever forget that contribution by Cuba. So it not only spoke about solidarity and organized international forums and agencies like OSPAL and so on for solidarity, but it demonstrated solidarity in very concrete terms by sending thousands of its sons and daughters to Africa to fight to ensure the defeat of that racist apartheid regime in South Africa and to ensure the complete independence and liberation of Angola, Mozambique, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and so on. And Cuba, of course, provided the many scholarships for people from Africa, students from the liberation, sent to Cuba from the liberation movements and so on, that enabled a cadre of technical people, competent people, doctors, economists, engineers, architects, and many others, who would then be able to, in the post-independence period, in the post-liberation period, be able to manage and run the affairs of their countries in Africa. We must never underestimate Cuba's contribution by way of thousands of scholarships to people from the African continent and also in the Caribbean. From throughout the English-speaking Caribbean, young people have gone to Cuba on scholarship who, although we were independent, were not able to provide tertiary education for all of our young people, and hundreds benefited from that and have come back to contribute to the development of our countries. And that's very, very important indeed. I want to switch now just briefly to the issue of Cuba's post-revolutionary organization, taking up from something that my sister Olga said. about the Afro-Cubans, there were some important institutions that were established in Cuba. So you had, for example, the Folklorico Cubano Nacional, the Cuban National Folklore Institute, which was headed for very many years by Rogelio Martinez Fure, who I knew personally as well, and who came to Trinidad for CARIFESTA and met him in London at the International Book Fair organized by John LaRose and others in London. And that Folklorico Nacional was a very important center for Afro-Cuban dance and music and much more, in terms of the retention, the retention of African cultural traditions. So that was very important. And then you had, of course, in Santiago, the establishment of the Casa del Caribe, which is focused principally on the literature of the Caribbean, but primarily, of course, Afro-Caribbean. And that's an important center. And of course, Santiago is the city where Fidel launched in 1953, July 26, the attack on the Moncada barracks. And most of the revolutionary movements began in the east, in Santiago, and moved west towards Havana, across the mountains. But you also have in Santiago the Festival of Fire, which is dedicated every year in July to a particular country, for that country to showcase its literature, its music, its dance, and so much more, and engage in artistic and intellectual activities. So Cuba has made sure that it is a center for the engagement of African cultural, both out of Africa and African retentions in the Caribbean and the diaspora. And then, of course, Casa de las Americas itself, based in Havana, has highlighted the works of important West Indian writers like George Lamming, Norman Gervin, and many others, and was led at one time by that very important Afro-Cuban poet, Nancy Morion. In terms of films, I must remember and recall Gloria Rolando, very important Afro-Cuban filmmaker, who produced that seminal film on Ogun, celebrating the African religions in Cuba, and also produced a film, Bill, very important film, 1912, on the 1912 massacre of the Independent Party of Color, which massacre had been not talked about by the Cuban Revolution for very many years. And Gloria, through that work and through a film, brought out that massacre when, after the 1895 War of Independence, under that Platt Amendment, under the US influence, the Black political class, liberation class, was attacked, and hundreds were killed. And Gloria produced an important film on that, as well as the West Indian migration into Cuba, so that there are people in Cuba who trace their roots back to Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and many of the other West Indian islands, and so on. And so that is also an important history and connection between Cuba and the African diaspora. I want to now speak about Cuba's contribution by way of its medical brigades throughout the world, but we particularly recall, if we're speaking about its impact to the global African world, the medical brigades in West Africa dealing with the Ebola crisis. The Cuban doctors were virtually the only international doctors who were prepared to go into West Africa and deal with patients who had Ebola and help those countries get that Ebola pandemic under control and significantly eliminated. They went into Haiti. They were in Haiti before, but they were the doctors who were there in that devastating earthquake and were able to contribute immensely to the Haitian people. And the Cuban doctors are still, and nurses, medical professionals are still in Haiti providing support to the Haitian people and elsewhere in CARICOM as well. And then I also want to speak just very briefly about the fact that Cuba was recognized by CARICOM in 1972, the then four independent nations of CARICOM, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. And Fidel deeply appreciated it. And as a result of that, established the CARICOM Cuba Day, which is in December every year, and every 2 years as a CARICOM Cuba Summit. And it is very, very distressing that yesterday, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago launched a vitriolic attack on Cuba. It sounded as if it was written by a junior staffer in the US State Department, but she said that Cuba is communist, is a dictatorship, and she ranted and raved and so on, obvious as a prelude to supporting whatever the US is planning to do in Cuba. But we will oppose that. We will call out those narratives, and we will do as much as we can as a Caribbean people in solidarity with Cuba, because Cuba has given so much to so many. And Norman Gervin, in that very important address when he received an honorary doctorate at the University of Havana, Norman Gervin being the outstanding Caribbean political economist, Norman said in his address that the debt to Cuba is unpayable, which was a takeoff on what Fidel had said in the 1985 conferences on the foreign debt, which conferences were themed, the debt is unpayable. And Norman was saying that the debt to Cuba for all that they have done, African liberation, scholarships for our people, medical brigades, what Olga spoke about in terms of consciousness and so on, all of those things, the debt is unpayable. But we must step up now and do our very best to support Cuba materially and otherwise in solidarity as they're faced with their gravest threat by US imperialism since the start of the revolution in January of 1959. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have to afford you a couple of more minutes, however, to talk about the contribution of Cuba to the Grenada Revolution. And so I will extend a few more moments to you, sir, to just trace that, since you and I have been working together and others on this screen to continue those efforts.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Daniels. I don't know how I missed that out, but you're right. I mean, the Maurice Bishop International Airport would not be in existence had it not been for the solidarity by Cubans in terms of engineering, material support, personnel, and so on, design. They essentially built that international airport, which is central now to Grenada's economic development and independence. And of course, Cubans died at the airport defending themselves against the US military when the US invaded on the 25th of October 1985, following the destruction of the Grenadian Revolution through the internal crisis that began with the assassination of Boris on the 19th of October 1983. Sorry, I said 85, 1983. So yes, that the Cuban contribution to Grenada was very, very real and concrete, both in terms of material support to build the airport and in terms of lives lost in the defense of Grenada against US imperialism. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, let me just quickly say to our folks who are tuning in and listening in, we also want to express our appreciation to Rock Newman and the Rock Newman Show. They are tuning in and are partnering with us, or at least they are plugged in, and we certainly want to acknowledge that, because we are trying to get as wide an audience as we possibly can on this educational forum. Let me also say that all of our panelists have been great and are contributing in enormous information. But for me personally, I must say that the next presenter has been one who has just been tireless in educating and getting us to understand, and devoting his life really to Afro descendants and getting us to understand the connectivity and the importance of making those connectivities, but also understanding Cuba and how Cuba situates itself within the global struggle against imperialism and for a better world. So I just wanted to say that, because I certainly have benefited enormously from this next person who is just incredible in terms of his contribution. So James Early now has the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Ron Daniels, and to the Pan-African Unity Dialogue for this, I think, extraordinary and informative to action public education panel. Let me just sketch out a few points. One, by beginning to by acknowledging that the contributions of Herb Boyd and Bill Fletcher and David Muhammad, I think, have laid out the centrality of African American solidarity with Cuba, keeping in mind that this was not just a relationship between the Harlem African American community with Malcolm X and Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution, but that Fidel Castro had arrived with his delegation to a United Nations conference, the global community in New York City, one of the most diverse cities of the entire world. And therefore, the relationship between what happened in Harlem with Fidel Castro and Malcolm X and others really sets Black Americans in a global context, in a national context about national policy and national solidarity. And of course, as David Abdullah has laid out in relationship to Africa, we see the global humanity of the Cuban Revolution, which is really indexed around overcoming and defeating apartheid in South Africa, which was a global affair in which Cuba played an extraordinary role about the vantage point of how humanity should evolve. I was recently in Cuba the last week of January with the Busboys and Poets travel a tribal travel group, and with two other people from the delegation of 20, I had another opportunity to meet with President Diaz-Canales of Cuba, along with Carlos Ocasio, who is the deputy foreign minister. And I just want to address, before going to the specifics of my comments, the context of looking at the international crisis in Cuba and sort of reframing that of Cuba in the context of an economic crisis. And this was my comment to the president, that we are experiencing a crisis, that is a lack of normalization in the United States with the defeat, the dismantling of liberal democracy, in which diversity, equity, and inclusion has been the main catalyst. And of course, who has been the most catalytic force in opening up the public space in the United States? It's been African Americans. And this has direct implications for the role of African Americans at this moment of the internal crisis in Cuba. We're also witnessing a crisis that is a failure of the normalization, at least at the level of formal protocols in the international arena, with the post-World War II accords, in which they are now being dismantled, dismissed, and overrun by an imperial presidency here in the United States of America, backed by 1/3 of the voting population, called the MAGA social movement, which has political operatives in states across the United States and in the United States Congress, and certainly in the White House. And again, it has particular implications for what's going on with African Americans. We're also seeing in Cuba the context of the Monroe Doctrine, which is an attempt to replace the 1823 Monroe Doctrine, which was to keep Europe out of the affairs of the Americas, to allow the United States government and corporations to dominate this hemisphere. Cuba pierced all of that. Cuba broke free and said, we will be self-determined. We will chart our own course. And so it has become a model of possibilities for a new kind of humanity, which again has been expressed by David Abdullah and what the Cubans have contributed in Africa and the Caribbean, as well as on the case of Olga Sanabria, pointing out Cuba's role in the anti-colonial movement for the independence of Puerto Rico. Un pájaro con dos alas, a bird with two wings. Cuba consistently, every year at the UN, raises the issue of the colonization of Puerto Rico. And of course, for our listening audience, go back and look at the importance of Cuba and Puerto Rico and the imperial expansion of the United States all the way to Hawaii in the late 1800s. Now, we talk about the impact on the blockade. From the vantage point of Cubans, it is indeed a blockade. It is a blockade, first and foremost, that impacts the sons and daughters of Cuban households who are members of the Cuban government to take panoramic responsibility for what the well-being of all Cubans. I start with the Cuban government, the impact on the Cuban government, because these are the sons and daughters of Cuban households. They join the Communist Party. They also become elected members. I want to underscore elected members by their respective communities in their cities and in their provinces to look at how to best affect the well-being of all Cubans. With the Eisenhower administration and the Kennedy administration, they explicitly laid out the goal of overthrowing the Cuban government by squeezing economically the Cuban people to oust their sons and daughters who were taking responsibility for the well-being of the country to reflect the interests, the diverse interests of the Cuban population that forms the Cuban nationality. This is really, really important because now we're at a moment in which, we talk about the Cuban people, but it is the Cuban government that the Rubio-Trump policy is attempting to overthrow. And they're attempting to do that by starving the Cuban people such that they will then revolt against their own sons and daughters. This is very important. It is a blockade from that side against medicine, food, fuel. But from this side, it is an embargo. It is a congressional embargo, and it has particular implications, again, for the Black community. Because the major governance opposition, which is the Democratic Party, to the Republican-controlled Imperial White House and the Republican-controlled Congress, is the Democratic Party, and the head of the foreign affairs in the minority side of the House is an African American, Congressman Gregory Meeks in New York City. Again, African American sitting at the center of possibilities of taking on this economic warfare, which starts with an embargo. And so it is very important that people contact the congressman, let them know of our opposition and what we as citizens can do to really stop right now the most urgent issue, which is the blockade against fuel. Because fuel is the key to public stability in Cuba. It is key to lighting. It is key to cooking. It is key to the school system being open. It is key to transportation. It is key to fueling the trucks that would pick up trash. I just received an email this morning from a Paul Coates, who went down to the Cuban book fair, and he says the Cuban people are being starved. You all know Paul Coates, Black Classic Press, Black Panther, a very important institution in our community. What then action steps should we take? We should contact Congressman Meeks. We should contact Jeffries, head of the Democratic Party. They need to intervene openly and educate the public. Trying to stop Marcos Rubio. I want to underscore the focus on Marco Rubio, because he is the brain trust strategist behind the Trump administration declaring that Cuba is a particular enemy of the U.S., which is unfalse. We must support the Cuban call for dialogue. The Cubans have always been open to dialogue under two conditions. It will be respectful dialogue, and there will be no preconditions. We must go back and call on President Barack Obama, who, along with the administration of Raul Castro in Cuba, achieved the highest standard of global relations between the United States and Cuba by setting up a movement towards the normalization of relations, in which a number of accords were put in place, and the Cubans still execute on that, the interdiction of drugs and the like, the immigration policies. Barack Obama needs to step forward now, perhaps to speak to perhaps his highest international accord, and that was this relationship with the presidency of Raul Castro and establishing diplomatic relationships with Cuba. I ask the listening audience to go online, to search in your communities. there are hundreds and hundreds of relationships between not only African Americans, but Americans in general in collaboration with Cubans who are doing humanitarian efforts in collaboration. I want to underscore collaboration. The Cubans are not looking for charity or free aid. They're looking for collaboration as the United States attempts to starve them out and to try to force them into turning against their government. The United States policy is to really now, from that side, to blockade Cubans so that Cubans cannot exit. In the last 3 years, there have been approximately 2 million Cubans who have left basically for economic reasons. The United States is now trying to stop that such that they can force an implosion. So I ask you to collaborate at that scale. However, I want to go back to the Cuban government. It is important to recognize that the scale of the problem of this U.S. economic warfare blockade with sanctions and now the intensified starvation policy requires that the Cuban government be able to carry out its responsibilities to its citizens. This is the importance of focusing on the congressional arena and trying to move people like Barack Obama. I also want to encourage people to travel to Cuba. It is legal to travel to Cuba, establish ties with local citizens, as well as ties with the Cuban government, such that your contributions, your solidarity contributions, can be put into systematic organization to have impact and contributions across the country, not just one-offs. But as I said, there are hundreds of issues, hundreds of projects going on that you can tie into. Finally, let me conclude by saying this, that the ideal of Cuba goes back to the ideal of the Haitian Revolution. It was the Haitian Revolution which opened up the revolutionary movements against Spanish colonialism. It was a Haitian Revolution that is still paying the price of breaking free from slavery and colonialism in Haiti. The second major development of freedom was the Cuban and is the Cuban Revolution. It is an ideal that the United States government and corporations are trying to squash. It is an ideal that we see that has practical implications, as has been laid out in all of the previous presentations here, in material, humanitarian, humanistic ways. As Fidel Castro noted, they went into Africa at the request of Africans to fight for African liberation. They did not bring home 1 ounce of oil. They did not bring home 1 ounce of gold. They went for humanitarian, democratic reasons. And so here is the context in which African Americans must step forth with our representatives who are key to the Democratic Party opposition to Republicans. And we are key in relating to the development of democracy within Cuban socialism. There is a presidential commission against racism and discrimination, which indicates that in the context of Cuban socialism, there is a recognition not only of the legacy of racism that has marginalized many sectors of Cuban society, but that with issues of remittances, it was mostly white-skinned Cubans who came to the U.S. It is mostly white-skinned Cubans who were in Miami who are trying to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. And so that there is this still disproportionate impact on people of color in Cuba as there is an overall attack on Cuban society at large. This is the context in which African Americans and the African Union and African countries should look at taking up solidarity with Cuba by breaking this embargo on the U.S. side and stopping the blockade against Cuba expressing its own humanity, particularly on the oil question right now, which is key to Cuban revolutionary survival. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James Early. And I would wanted to ask you a question about the solidarity, and just I know there are lots of different things going on, but I recall the work that Lucius Walker used to do with with IFCO. Every year he would organize, I don't know, I mean, everybody in the world kind of knew that this caravan was coming and whatever and so forth. And I'm wondering whether that is something that I know there are many different things happening, And this is really small in the bigger picture of the massive amount of aid. But symbolically and materially, it might be significant. I wonder whether you think something like that is also something that we might want to try to emulate.
IFCO is huge in the U.S. solidarity historically and contemporarily with Cuba. Lucius Walker and Fidel Castro were very, very close in their discussions about the nature of the world and not just solidarity with Cuba, but how to envision new possibilities. IFCO is still operating in New York City, and I would urge people to go online and contact them. That is a key element of taking aid in collaboration with Cuba. It's not just charity to Cuba, but it's in collaboration with Cuban communities and with the Cuban government. So it's certainly IFCO is one of the key sectors to collaborate with.
All right, thank you very much. Now, our next section, and we hope people will hang with us. This is, at least for me, very informative. I'm learning a great deal. Even though I know a little bit, I'm learning more. And it's important to get the centrality of the African community, the African American community, what we can do to be outlined as James Early has done. Our next section is for what we call respondents. And I know that one of our respondents was not feeling well and had to excuse herself. Another was not able to come actually because of a national board meeting that is taking place. So I know we at least have Milton Alamati and we may have Dr. Amara Inya, but we will start with the person who within the Pan-African Unity Dialogue is the chair of our task force on conflicts and conflict resolution or conflicts in Africa and the Caribbean. He is the editor of the influential Black Star News and much more, soon to be Dr. Milton Alamati, and he is a founding member of the Pan-African Unity Dialogue. Brother Alamati, you have the floor for your response.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, our comrades, for the wonderful presentations by Sister Olga, Brother David, Brother Fletcher, and Brother Early. The African Union for 17 years in a row has denounced the embargo against Cuba, which essentially has been enforced since 1960. While that is good and well, it's unfortunate that at this moment of dire crisis, African countries are not able to step forward much more significantly. Brother Early made several types of suggestions, interventions by the public. I think one possible intervention that the public should consider is to urge a special emergency meeting by the African Union to discuss the Cuban situation and to come up with some concrete initiatives. It is really a shame that it is because of the status of the disunited states of Africa that resource-rich countries such as South Africa, Angola, Congo, Ghana, and Nigeria, and a few others cannot come collectively and agree that this is what we are going to do to help the Cuban people. We're going to use our resources. We have the right to use our resources to intervene. And of course, part of the problem is that, as Thomas Sankara reminded eloquently in 1987, when you take such decisive action individually, you will not survive. Of course, Sankara in 1987 was calling for renouncing the debt at the OAU conference in Addis Ababa. But he said, if I do it individually, I will not be alive to attend next year's conference. That was in July, October 15, 1987. He was killed by agents of imperialism. But this is a moment where several African countries should come together and collectively speak with one voice and say, this is what we are going to do. And if it's 10 of them collectively making such a stand, it's going to be difficult to eliminate all of them collectively. So that would be my suggestion for intervention. Perhaps we can even consider drafting a statement that we get the public to then support. But if the members of the public want to individually send an email to the African Union Chair Commission and ask that the African Union and African leaders should indeed consider a special emergency meeting for Cuba, the email address for that is dinfo, which is DINFO at africa-union.org. I just want to maybe echo a little bit about what the brother Abdallah said in terms of the significant interventions of Cuba that significantly impact Africa and change the course of history. We should, in fact, pose the question, without the intervention at Quito Cuanaval, how would have African history transpired? In fact, would Mandela have been released, or might he have even died in prison? When would Namibia have won its independence? These are legitimate questions. In fact, we can even go further back to 1975. Without Cuba's intervention to secure independence for Angola under the MPLA, UNITA under Savimbi, and the FNLA under Roberto were about to seize power in Luanda. And they would have installed to go back to Cuban analogy, a Batista-type government in Angola. But it was because of Cuba's decisive intervention that these agents of imperialism were literally defeated overnight. And that is how Angola became independent under the MPLA. Let's go back to the intervention in Quito Cuanaval. Even though Brother Abdallah spoke about it, I just want to add one or two other comments on that. Castro did not even inform the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was, of course, Cuba's primary sponsor, sustained its economy, sustained it with military armaments, even though they did manufacture some of their own. And Castro perhaps feared that Moscow might have tried to vigorously intervene to stop that significant intervention because the Soviet Union was going through transformation and was already seeking out and trying to improve relations with the United States. So Castro knew that if he was going to send as many as 20 to 30,000 soldiers and heavy equipment, he didn't have time to discuss that with the Soviet Union. That's one significant point I wanted to bring out. And then the second point was just remarkable. The South African Minister of Defense, Magnus Malan, said up to years after that battle, he could not figure how Castro could have personally commanded that battle over a satellite phone. He said he'll never understand how I accomplished it, but obviously it was successful and it changed the course of history. As Brother Abdallah said, it led to the independence of Namibia. It led to the freedom of Nelson Mandela, and it subsequently led to the end of at least formal apartheid in South Africa. And this intervention did not begin in the 1970s, of course. As Brother Abdallah also pointed out, it begins in the 1960s when there was an attempt by Che Guevara to fight against Mobutu and Chombe. That was not successful, but that was a very valuable lesson that the Cubans then used later on in the 1970s and the 1980s. And then, of course, these military interventions overshadow the very significant contributions Cuba made in the medical field, in teaching and education, in providing scholarships to tens of thousands of Africans from most African countries who got these scholarships to go to Cuba, and Cuban doctors going to all these countries. And as previously mentioned, the intervention with Ebola and the intervention with the COVID-19 crisis as well. And then I guess the one final point I would like to say is this. The Cuban model of organizing government and being able to survive in the shadows of the beast under embargo all these years should really be a teaching and learning experience for African countries. A country with a population of 10 million or so, able to accomplish so much, able to even assist Africa, a continent with a population of 1.5 billion, we really have a lot of learning and a lot of issues that we need to ponder collectively as Africans on the continent. So thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to share my own comments and observations. Luta continua on behalf of the people of Cuba. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Alamati. And I have to say that I have been similarly concerned about of course, this current administration is called African nations and nations in the development world shithole countries. And of course, there is a way in which the neo-colonial status still grips many of them, and so there's a certain fear factor involved. But it would be critically important for these nations, given the history that has been outlined, to take a bold step in the manner that you have outlined and James Early has outlined. So I'm very, very interested in that. In fact, well, this is fantasy, but I mean, given the riches that Africa has and oil and all the various other things it has, the vision of Garvey certainly would be helpful right now, because they could just say, they could say, we will bring the oil, we will bring whatever resources are needed. Obviously, that is perhaps fantasy land now, but certainly dreaming in that way and trying to actualize it would become important. So I think this declaration, or whatever you want to call it, is an important, we say nomo, the word, putting that word out and magnifying it, particularly in the age of social media, could be in fact a powerful tool. So we look forward to that action item being implemented and working on it with others who want to do so. I'm not sure whether Mel Foote made it or not. In fact, I'm not even sure in my battle fatigue state whether we sent him the link. I know he certainly was circulating the promo and asked and encouraged others to attend. So I don't think I see Mel in the among the participants. I don't see him, but we certainly want to acknowledge his contribution. He was called upon by the Cubans a few years ago, and certainly James Early is familiar with this, to in fact assemble some leaders in Washington to have a discussion about Cuba and building and strengthening relationships. Even though his organization is the Constituency for Africa, he took on that role, and we want to certainly express our appreciation to him for having done that. And we hope that we did not create a faux pas and not send him the link so that he could engage. And if he's out there, perhaps when we open it up, he'll say so we can find a way to get him into the conversation, because he is an invaluable asset to our movement. I know that Dr. Melina Abdullah did check in. She is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Grassroots, but she was not feeling well and had to excuse herself. I do not see Amara Inya, who is the co-executive director of the Movement for Black Lives. I know that she is speaking at, I think, University of Pennsylvania, but said that she might have a substitute if she were not able to make it. And so I don't quite know what may have happened there, but we certainly are going to inform them, keep them apprised of what has occurred here today, so that they can be a part of the overall response in terms of the call to action. So now what we would like to do is open it up, and I'm going to need some help from Louis Romaine and from Kyle Pennerman as how we do this. But we certainly wanted to create time for comments from the audience, from those who have been listening, comments, questions, recommendations, suggestions for a period of time. We would say about 30 minutes to do that. And so the chat is, I guess, already been open, but I guess the chat now is open, and the chat is the floor for people who have questions, comments, observations. It need not be a question. You may have a suggestion. You may have a statement you want to make in that regard. We welcome your participation in that regard. And I guess, Louis, you will shout it out or let me know who's who and whatever the comment is, or however it is being managed. Y'all know I'm a tech neothal, so I'm not quite sure how y'all younger brains are going to pull this off. we certainly wanted to do it. So any instructions you want to give, please feel free to speak up and let us know how we're proceeding. Kyle or Louis? Hello, y'all.
Yeah, give me a second. I'm trying to pull Louis in.
Okay. Oh, there's Mel Foote. There's Mel Foote. He's in the waiting room. Let's get Mel in. Mel is in. Okay, Mel. To our Secretary of State, man, I was getting nervous. I was apologizing. I thought I had made a mistake. I said, I can't. But we did give you your plaudits and whatever. You may have been listening and may have heard some of it. I'm not sure whether you did or not. You have such global responsibilities and so forth. It has been an incredible conversation, and lots of recommendations have been made. But we certainly want to, while they're getting the chat together and how that's going to take, because we want to give people the opportunity to ask questions or make comments, we certainly want to yield the floor to you in terms of your reflections and response to the four major presentations that were made. One on the history and background of what Cuba was like before the revolution, the accomplishments of the revolution, the contribution of Cuba to global Africa, as well as the recommendations put forth by our mutual friend, James Early. So you had the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I have been listening to a lot of it. I didn't have the link, but certainly James Early's presentation was, as expected, extraordinarily scholarly and detailed, and I thought very action oriented. So I don't have a whole lot. Milton Alamati, I know he's getting a PhD. You mentioned that he's getting his doctorate. Don't do it. Once you get your doctorate, then you got to talk big and that kind of thing. And you might lose your ghetto credentials. But I would just say that, from where I look, I follow what's going on quite closely, not just in Cuba, but really globally. And I can say that right now, we're facing some tremendous challenges. I'm looking at about 20 countries right now. I mean, Nigeria, they're bombing it. Now the U.S. is putting troops on the ground in Nigeria. What is that about? And we basically are extorting money out of some of these countries. They're taking Africans, who are being deported from here and dumping them into countries that, in Africa and elsewhere. And the country's just got to smile and say, thank you, Mr. Trump, and that kind of thing. So we're in a real challenging position. I'm thinking all about Jesse Jackson right now, and Jesse, of course, has been extraordinarily critical in a lot of these discussions over the last 30 or 40 years. And now we're looking at the situation where Mike Johnson decides that we can't honor him here in Washington. At the rotunda, he's claiming that they got some rules. Well, this is coming directly from Trump, And yesterday, Trump at the Black History Month program was talking about how Jesse is such a good old friend and all this kind of thing, all that kind. And he didn't want this kind of event to happen in Washington. He's thinking the Million Man March. He's thinking Black folks going to get organized again. So I'm looking at it and I'm asking myself, what are we going to do about it? There's not a whole lot of options here because we're spread real thin, not just in other parts of the world, but here in the United States too. A lot of people are just thinking about survival. How am I going to feed my family? How am I going to pay my rent? Jobs are being snatched and all kinds of things are happening to people of Africa and African descent. So I don't really have much more to add to this discussion. I think it's been thoroughly outlined and detailed. And so I think it's, now we ought to hear from what the audience is saying and what other people are thinking, but we need to brainstorm about, where do we go from here? And it's not just about Cuba, it's globally, but Cuba is certainly a central part of this.
All right. Well, thank you much. Really, really, really appreciate it. And again, my apologies. My apologies for not getting the link. I take full responsibility for it because I am just battle fatigue right now, and it dawned on me. But I appreciate you sending. I saw you. I'm on your list, so I saw you send it out and whatever, and we appreciate that. We're going to turn now to Louis. Are there questions in the chat or comments that you can outline for us? So is that how we're proceeding? Louis.
No, there's none at the moment, Dr. D. None at the moment.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we will keep the chat open. So this also offers an opportunity for us to have a space for some dialogue among ourselves, among the panelists, if you will, in terms of any questions or further amplification that anyone might have. So we have maybe another 25 minutes or so. If people would like to do that, we certainly can do it. We know that Bill Fletcher is having his daughter has a birthday today, and he's going to go off and be a wonderful dad, which is a part of the revolutionary responsibility. So I don't know, Bill, if you have anything else you'd like to contribute based on what you've heard, but the floor is open for anyone else who would like to take advantage of, while we're waiting for any comments that might come from the chat, to express yourself.
Yeah, I'd like to say one thing, and again, thank you. And this was a wonderful, wonderful panel. I want to remind people that in the middle of the Great Depression, African Americans mobilized against the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. And the situation in the United States was bleak, just as Mel was describing today. It was bleak. But it was the organization of Black folks that was part of, in fact, a growing global anti-fascist movement that was quite remarkable. And it was a Black-led movement. And I think that at the moment we're in, Black America must speak up about international affairs. I love these suggestions that were raised. I have been pulling my hair out, trying to figure out why Angola, which was the recipient of Cuban sacrifices, has not been sending tanker after tanker to Cuba with fuel, daring the United States, in effect, to attack them. There's part of me that just simply doesn't get it. And I know all the rationales, neocolonialism and this and that. I'm just sort of tired of hearing excuses. And I think that now is the time, and James and I have discussed this, you and I, Dr. Daniels, have spoken about this. We need an emergency response on Cuba. The normalization, the pro-normalization movement in the United States has been racked with factionalism, with sectarianism, with people putting more priority on brand than on winning. And at this point, I think it's time for us to say basta. Enough. This is absurd. There needs to be the mobilization that's been discussed here, and that needs organization. And I think it needs to start. And I think that today's discussion, I'm hoping, will be the beginning of that organization. But without organization, we're toast.
Right.
Dr. Daniels.
Yes, hold on a minute. Hold on just a minute, Milton. So I'm just trying to understand the technology. So Louis and or Kyle, you're saying that there are comments on YouTube Is there a way for those to be extracted? Is there a way to integrate those into this conversation or not? While I mean, I want to hear from Milton Alamade, but then I need to hear from that because we certainly want to. If there are people who are commenting, even if you share their comments, we want to be able to get that into the mix. Milton, go right ahead.
No, I just wanted to endorse what Bill had said. I think part of the main problem is that we lack bold, dynamic leaders on the continent right now. People who are willing to just take the initiative and take it where it may. And perhaps it's time for us to also raise some challenging questions to the Angolan authorities. Listen, what is your stand on this? Given that the whole world knows the significance of the Cuban intervention. South Africa, what is your position on this? We know imperialism is breathing fire behind your neck, but that does not erase the sacrifice the Cubans made to significantly impact the direction of history in your country. Sometimes we don't ask them these challenging questions very publicly. They need to respond. And if they respond negatively, then that becomes a part of the recorded history as well.
I agree with that. And I think that I really agree with that. And I'm hoping that there's a way in which we can, again, some of the organizations, some of who could not or were not present today for whatever reason, but some of the Movement for Black Lives, which has over 100 organizations, mostly younger organizers who are skilled, by the way, at social media and all that, and we have relationships with them as well as Black Lives Matter grassroots. I know that Dr. Molina wanted to be here. I talked to her personally. But I think that one of the things that we need to do, and we'll talk about this, we need a drafting committee. We need to draft a statement on this regard. And we have to figure out, a media strategy. Maybe we do something at the National Press Club. Maybe we do something in which how we organized around the Museveni. It was not a lot of us in the Pan-African Unity Dialogue. And we showed up at the UN with 50 people and we raised our voices and we recorded it and shot it out there. We went to the Ugandan embassy and it was only 15 or 20 of us out there and raised our voices, and it had an impact. So maybe some of those kinds of steps may be small, but if those of us who are willing can in fact use those steps to really, really move forward. And I also think simultaneously, I kind of think there's a way in which connecting with IFCO and talking with them and figuring out how to do a massive kind of caravan. One of those, could be a galvanizing point as well. And I think, and from my thinking, it is also to ignite in the Black community this notion that we really hold the key to the midterms right now. And some of you know I've been working and trying to figure out some stuff that got stepped on. We were getting ready to do some meeting, and we still are going to try to do some meetings. But this should be a central part of the overall discussion, right? And we hold the key to taking the House, and the Senate is in play because, and forgive me for saying this, but large numbers of people don't vote in America, unfortunately. But we can. We could be, that's what Reverend Jesse Jackson talked about, being the margin of difference. And that's what I'm trying to push, and with my own little voice and whatever, to get people to say, we can actually, in this moment, seize the House, and the Senate is definitely in play, because in many of those districts, we will be the margin. They're the ones, in the barbershops and the beauty salons and even in the professional class who don't think their vote counts and so forth. If we actionalize what Reverend Jesse Jackson called those rocks just laying around on the ground, then that gives us a tremendous amount of leverage, in terms of, even if the person who's in the White House remains there. But forgive me for just going off a little bit here, because now hold up a minute. Now, Louis, y'all tell me about what's happening with YouTube in the chat, because I saw a couple of comments. Can you just repeat them rather than have me do them or whatever? Louis, can you do that? I saw one from Aura Burke. Apparently I saw a name, Aura Burke, who at least While we're doing that, I'm going to go to Olga first, James, and then I'm going to come back to you. I want to,
Good.
Sister, please, Olga. You're on mute. You're on mute. You're still on mute. Now you're good.
Okay. First of all, I'm really grateful for all the presentations and the way that the activity has brought together all this information and also suggestions. I wanted to make 2 points. And it's that we can kind of like demand of ourselves, and that's what we have to do at the present time, because we are longtime activists. And even though it's been a long time, many, many years, many challenges, but we're the ones that are active at this time. And yes, we need to call on young people to get involved and give them ideas about what they can do. But we need to start these things. And we also need to face the reality that there are so many issues that all of us are working on. So right now, for example, in Puerto Rico, we have every Tuesday, we have a picket in front of the building where the Israeli consulate is, in solidarity with Palestine and to support Gaza. And then there's the issue of Venezuela, there's the issue of Cuba, there's the issue of the remilitarization of Puerto Rico, and many internal, so-called internal issues in Puerto Rico. So we need to kind of like be aware of that. And I think one of the ways that we can face that, which is somewhat taking place in Puerto Rico, is that we have sort of like an umbrella issue which impacts upon solidarity with a lot of different causes. And that is the denunciation of the intensification of the use of Puerto Rico as a point of departure for aggression because of the military bases, the United States military bases in Puerto Rico. So that's one thing. We sort of like focused on anti-militarism and especially against the use of Puerto Rico as a point of departure for aggression. The other thing that I wanted to mention, there was a question on the chat regarding the Puerto Rican flag and the Cuban flag. And yes, that issue is continually present because it's so clear. And just to answer that, when I mentioned the Cuban Revolutionary Party in New York and the Committee for Puerto Rican Independence within that party, that they actually designed the Puerto Rican flag to be similar and just invert the colors as relates to the Cuban flag. And that's where the relationship is. It was a conscious decision because of the unity of these two peoples in their struggle up until that point to do that. I would also add regarding Puerto Rico that the independence movements of Puerto Rico and Cuba were much, much, much connected. And that when our pro-independence uprising in 1868 was squashed for a variety of reasons, the Puerto Rican leaders at that time decided to give to the Cuban independence forces all of the resources that we had. So that included arms and other equipment, and it also included that Puerto Rican military leaders actually integrated into the Cuban War of Independence. So I also wanted to mention that. But in summary, I really think that, yes, we've been working for a very long time. Yes, we're involved in many things, but yes, we need to reach deep inside and get that energy and get that intent to continue and to bring new people in, to bring young people in, but also to see if we can establish some umbrella issues that address many of the challenges that we have right now, including Cuba solidarity. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go to James early. I am also going to call Sister Kim Poole, who is now in our space, not to do a tribute as we had asked her to do. We're beyond that, but she's been listening to the conversation. One of the reasons why we try to invite, we work as hard as we can to invite new voices into the mix. She is someone who is an artist. Art is incredibly important in these matters, and she is known and has been traveling all over the world. And I would be interested in her observations and her response to what she's heard in terms of any potential action. So we'll go to James first, then we'll go to Kim Poole, and then we'll go to Louis for any observations that are percolating on the chat, both on YouTube or however y'all doing that.
Just quickly, one, please do reach out to the Interreligious Community Foundation, IFCO. Gail Reed, the daughter of the founder, has retired from the foundation. She's not retired from solidarity work with Cuba, however. Reach out to Reverend Claudia de la Cruz, a very important, I'm going to give her a designation as a young adult, very, very conscious activist in the context of liberation theology, and they are doing major projects around Cuba. So please do reach out to them. Secondly, I think the Pan-African Unity Dialogue should consider organizing really as soon as possible a trip to Cuba, not so much among the principals today on this panel, but reaching out to these broader organizations that Ron Daniels has invited. One of the challenges for us is that there are sort of, if you will, longstanding professional solidarity communities that include both liberals, progressives, and socialists. And we tend to often be a circle within ourselves, and
Yes.
we need to reach out to the
Yes.
broader public. We need to reach out to the common empathy about humanity. It's not a question of whether they support Cuban socialism, but it is about how they stand against the inhumane policies, the barbarous policies that are being carried out. And this is a great moment to do so. Gaza, of all of the international issues, all of the international genocides that are going on, Gaza has concentrated that many segments of the U.S. public are willing to reach beyond national politics and to step forward and to say that we don't want to live in a world where our governments and our corporations are carrying out these kinds of inhumane, barbarous situations. And what we're seeing now with the attempt to starve Cubans, as Paul Coates has just reported from Black Plastic Press on his return, shows that there is a broader sector, our broader sectors plural, in the U.S. that we could organize and take a delegation to Cuba to see Cuba for themselves, to build relationships. And finally, we need to say to the mass media consistently, and we need to say to our elected officials, that the representatives of the Cuban people, the Cuban government, consistently and historically has said in the context of the Cuban Revolution right up to today, they are willing to discuss any issues that the United States government puts on the table, but with two conditions. They will be done with civil respect, and there will be no preconditions, and that they want to continue to implement the policies that the administrations of Barack Obama and Raul Castro brought to the fore, that the American public needs to be aware of. I will not try to elaborate all those, but there are ongoing relations. And I said finally, but this is finally, we are being stopped, as has been pointed out by Bill Fletcher and others, from taking advantage of one of the leading biotechnical countries in the entire world.
Yes.
That addresses issues of diabetes, addresses issues of cancer. There, ironically, is a relationship between a Northeastern company that has gone on for decades with the Cubans, trying to prevent cancer, Alzheimer's disease. Cubans have made extraordinary development. 5 vaccines during the point of COVID, in which, because the United States extends its financial domination around the world, prevented Cubans from getting basic things like needles, but countries like Mexico, like Brazil, like Italy, and all across Africa China utilizes those effective vaccines against COVID. This is what we are, the higher expressions of humanity and human global solidarity that we are being prohibited from dealing with. So please do say to our representatives, support the Cuban government's call to sit down and have dialogue with respect and with no preconditions.
Okay, Kim Poole, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Ron. You know me, always on the move doing this work. KIM, keep it moving in real time. Excuse the fact that I'm in the car as we speak. I worked really hard over the past 3 days with our international network of teaching artists, culture workers, healers, growers to put together the tribute for Malcolm X. And we did that because it's important that you all see the faces and hear the voices of those that affirm the fact that Malcolm X lives. We know that on February 21st in 1965, he was assassinated, but that was only in the physical realm. He lives. We still remember that in 1960, when he came into New York City, Fidel Castro, that Malcolm X met with him at Hotel Teresa in Harlem, and it was the grassroots people that reminded him of his humanity, of our humanity. And sometimes when we have these conversations at a grass tops level, in theory, we hear each other talk, we are like a reverberating room that echo the voices of what should be that Nigeria, one of the largest populations or budgets in the world, that they support Cuba. It should be that Congo has access to its resources and that the government is not a part of the problem. All these things should be. Museveni shouldn't be taking advantage of the young people, one of the youngest populations in the world in Uganda, but it is. But what I want you to also remember is the power of the narrative. At the same time in history, young people, young voices all over the world are embodying the spirit of Malcolm X. It's important that we continue to stay connected to that voice because it will be the energy that continues to empower us, to remind us that our seeds are being planted on fertile ground. Our legacy lives. Malcolm X's legacy lives too. And only when we hear those voices are we reminded of that and provide infrastructure for those young people, platforms for their voices, and opportunities for them to connect. You mentioned Paul Coates culminating his journey in Cuba. Right now, the Teaching Artists Institute is actually with him. It was with him on that journey, embodied in personhood. Dr. Obari Cartman out of Chicago. I met him last year in March at the Accra Reparations and Healing Summit #2 in Ghana because Dr. Ron Daniels made it possible for me to attend that meeting. And I didn't take it lightly. As a result of that opportunity, I immediately began to connect in real time with the people in that room and build with them. And Dr. Obari Cartman is a spirit worker. He's a healing artist, and he was with Baba Coates in Cuba, giving our local grassroots movements the report back too. So you're reporting back from the Baba. We're also getting our report backs from the junior, the older. He's not even an older yet. He's still in his 40s, a long way to go. But we want you to know that a part of this work is intergenerational dialogue, connecting the grassroots and the grass tops. And sometimes it's difficult because some things get lost in translation. But know that the young people hear you, we're connected, and Malcolm X, he lives. Thank you again for letting me respond. It's always a pleasure to be on this platform with you, Babas. It makes me feel like I'm going to have a page in history right alongside you, that you're giving me permission to stand on your shoulders. And I appreciate that. I'm grateful and I'm humbled.
Well, thank you very kindly. Thank you very kindly. And, it is intentional. We work hard at these matters and so forth. So we will have, and we appreciate it. Let's have Sister Olga speak, and then
I would like to say something too, please,
okay.
Dr. Ron. Very briefly.
And David Abdullah, I think we've got a lot of raw material to work with. And this conversation will not go in vain. Among other things, we can always do, in case you missed it, we are definitely going to put it out because this has been an incredible conversation. So Sister Olga, and then to David Abdullah, and then we certainly want to get any feedback from any of the chats, just either what people are saying or whether they can say it in person or whether Louis, you can read it or not. So let's go in that order, and then we're going to close out. Go right ahead, Sister Olga. And it's so great to meet you. It's so great to have you in this space. Don Rojas.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving me the floor.
Recommended by Don Rojas. We know you're all right.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor again. I want to say that I think the idea of a trip to Cuba is a great one. And even though there can be some trips before, I think an opportunity to mobilize people to Cuba and have a trip, and especially young people, is the centennial of Fidel Castro, which is going to be celebrated massively in Cuba next August. And even though August is 6 months away, and this is an urgent situation that's taking place right now, but maybe to organize for participation, especially young people who are starting to gain that consciousness to that event of celebrating the centennial, the process of organizing that can be seen as a process of education regarding Cuba and regarding Fidel Castro as such a maximum icon of the revolutionary movements worldwide. So I think maybe some thought should be given to using, sorry to use the word using, Fidel Castro Centennial as a platform for a trip, and in the process to the trip of educating, and in the process of having people participate and visit Cuba, young people, when they come back, they can be that force also to spread the word to broader sectors. Thank you.
Okay, David Abdallah.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Ron. Two very quick things. One is that we also have to call and do what we can to influence Brazil, because Brazil, quite apart from the large African diaspora in Brazil, Lula had a particularly close relationship with Fidel. They both started the Sao Paulo Forum. The MSA is a party member of the forum, and we are going to reach out to our comrades in the Workers' Party of Brazil and say to them that they have a major obligation, because Brazil is an oil-producing country as well. And Mexico should also not fear those tariffs. I mean, yesterday the Supreme Court gave a judgment, and of course Trump may try and do all kind of craziness, but at some point in time, leaders who are progressive have to take a stand and say we are not going to be cowed by the bully, and that we are going to do what is morally right. Because if we don't do what is morally right, then Cuba will certainly suffer the consequences. So in this hemisphere, we in the Assembly of Caribbean people had an executive meeting last night, and we're in the process of writing to the CARICOM heads of government who are meeting in summit from the 26th of February, that's next week, Thursday to Saturday. So we are going to be writing them and mobilizing around that, because we understand that Rubio is going to be in St. Kitts at that heads of government meeting. And we have to tell our leaders in CARICOM, apart from Prasad Bisesso, who was already sold out, but the other leaders have to stand up to Rubio and tell him where to get off. That statement he made in Munich was the worst racist and imperialist and colonial statement. It sounded like it came out of the Berlin conference of whenever that was, you know. So we are going to be doing what we can in terms of CARICOM and appealing to people in the Caribbean, not only to sign petitions and so on, but also to send material support. Things like solar panels and ECAP, the Institute of Friendship with the Peoples, can provide lists of things like medicines and other requirements that are badly needed at this point in time as part of our solidarity. Because George Weeks, former President General WTO, made a famous comment to us in the Union in the 70s. He said, we've become too resolutionary and not revolutionary enough.
Right.
Yeah. And I certainly think we have to use statements and resolutions to mobilize and organize, like Bill Fletcher and Olga and James have suggested. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Now I'm taking note of that statement that was made by Rubio. But those become raw material for, you know, the outrage becoming transformed into righteous engagement. I did a piece this morning on this whole thing about the Speaker of the House refusing to let Reverend Jackson lay in honor, you know, in the rotunda. So people are upset about it, but we got to upset about it's not enough. We have that becomes the fuel that we have to utilize. So we're going to be looking for people to add to, because it's the head and the heart. It's really the heart. When you can strike a chord like that, that really gets people to move. Now, CARICOM may not have moved in the way we wanted on this, but one of the precedents that I would cite in any declaration is it was CARICOM's courageous decision in 2014 that gave spark to the global reparations movement. I mean, they threw down, and they are under neo-colonial, but they said nonetheless, we throwing down. So this is one of those throwdown moments as well. So we certainly want to reference that. The other thing I would say is that if anybody knows how we operate with the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, it is the broadening always. I have this statement about not wanting to have what I call an incestuous conversation with ourselves. That is my guiding principle, so to speak. So any forums that you've seen, if you come to the State of the Black World Conference, you see a broad configuration of people. So I have some definite ideas about this delegation that James is talking about in terms of the breadth of it, the new voices and people who could definitely, I think we can begin to talk about that. And I think Sister Olga, it may be a two-step process. You know what I mean? We may have to do something before August, but that August, what we do before that can also set the stage for the broader piece, because we are definitely going to engage some of the organizations that we referenced, and some Sister Kim Poole is already here to help with that, and others. So I think we're going to be on a good path. Louis, anything in the chat that you want to just share with people in terms of what impressions people have had or conversations that are taking place that you want to synopsize? Louis, are you there?
Louis seems to be having some sort of technical issue, so I think we should just move forward.
Yeah, but Kyle, have you seen anything? I mean, you can. It doesn't have to.
I've posted them in the chat, so if any of the panelists would like to pick something.
I know, but could you just verbally share one or two of them with us? And by the way, we want to give Kyle a big round of applause for that opening prelude. I thought it was beautiful. I don't know. I thought it was a great job in laying it out in terms of the program, the way he organized that. He's a very dedicated brother. But Kyle, you feel free to share any 2 or 3 comments that you may have seen in the chat.
All right. I see a lot of thanks and appreciations. I see from AM 36979 XM. Thank you to everyone for this masterclass on global unity for human rights. I see brother David Abdullah got a shout out, sending love from Gaza, from someone whose tag name is LXS 1804. I also see a comment from someone saying that they would like to recognize the contributions of Cuban jazz artists and musicians like Chucho Valdez, excuse me, and others to the African diaspora.
Okay.
And after that, a lot of salutes. Salutes to Brother James Early, Bill Fletcher.
All right. Okay. Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate it. We appreciate it. We appreciate let's give Kyle a big round of applause for the work that he did putting this together in terms of the technology, and he's going to close. You'll see on the backside also the piece that he pulled together, which I'm very proud that he was able to put together. So, Mel, we're going to be reaching out to you, because you're to help pull all these pieces together in relatively short order. So I just want to close by thanking all of you for taking time out of your very, very busy schedules. Any errors, we take responsibility for it. And as I said before, for me, it's very challenging because in the middle of all the other things that we're doing, there was the passing of Reverend Jesse Jackson. I was deputy campaign manager for Reverend Jesse Jackson, executive director of the Rainbow Coalition, and worked very, very closely with him. We had a very, very special relationship. And so, and frankly, I've been working to do a broad pulling together of some folks around the state of emergency without urgency. You can see my essay, if you've not seen it, on the IBW website. The need, and of course, Mel, you were there in November when we issued the call and on that platform for action to take place, and people are doing good work. We use the parable of the dry bones. They aren't dry bones, they're live bones, but they're not connected, and so therefore, even though they're alive, the body is not functioning as well as it could. Or as Reverend Jesse Jackson would say eloquently, we need a protective quilt. There are a lot of patches out there. Some are more big patches, some of them are smaller patches. But his notion was there needs to be a connective thread that will create this protective quilt, in his ingenious way of putting it. And that's what I'm also laboring to try to do with whatever my little voice has in trying to pull that off. So in the middle of that, we also had to do this session today. Fortunately, we do have access to some of the key leaders of the Congressional Black Caucus. I already sent out to some of their key staffers the promo, the flyer about this. I got a couple of positive responses back, if you will. And so we'll be actualizing those in terms of some backdoor meetings or quiet meetings that we'll be having to take this message directly to some of them in those conversations. So again, Olga, I see your hands. I'm about to wrap up, but any final comment, please do, because we're at the mountaintop now.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to emphasize, because I didn't do it before, the historical solidarity of the African American and the Black community, the revolutionary organizations, on the case of Puerto Rico, and to specify that in 1974, we had a massive activity for the independence of Puerto Rico and the freedom of our political prisoners in Madison Square Garden. And the huge coalition that was organized to carry that out had tremendous and significant influence from a number of Black organizations in the United States. And also, finally, to state that Jesse Jackson was also a part of that. And Jesse Jackson also was once a petitioner in the United Nations hearings on the issue of the decolonization of Puerto Rico. So I just really wanted to not conclude without having mentioned that. Thank you so much for giving me the floor once again.
Well, thank you. Well, you're in now, so you know you're in. So so we're going to be reaching out to you as well and broadening as we move forward. I also just want to thank our comrades and friends in the Pan-African Unity Dialogue. We assumed that some of them are out there, and we could not let them all into space, but they are. It came out of a conversation we were having with the Pan-African Unity Dialogue. By the way, which is the mission of the Pan-African Unity Dialogue, is to make sure that we practice Pan-Africanism in this space. That is to say, to pull together Afro-descendants, Caribbean Americans, continental Africans, and quote unquote African Americans, so that we are not in conflict with each other. The fact that we are all of the same skin color does not necessarily mean anything. All skin folk ain't kinfolk. We're trying to figure out how to pull together, a major collaboration and move forward. So I conclude by saying Aluta Continua, and in the words of the Grenada Revolution, forward ever, backward ever. Forward ever, backward ever. Thank you so much.